I grew up in California. In my 20s, I moved out to a place in rural Idaho where my girlfriend's family lived. I only lived out there with her and them for about 6 years before her and I split up. Actually, it was a really rough breakup, and when people always talk about the one that got away, well, that was her. However, I'm not here to bore you with lost romance. I wanted to write to you because of the things that I saw while I lived with her family and her during that time. To protect her family, because I still respect and built those relationships, I'm going to keep where they lived privately. I can tell you it was southern Idaho, and it was a very, very rural area. The Snake River wasn't extremely far away. There's some hints. Now, nearby where her parents lived was a medium-sized farm. Maybe not even a farm, but I know for certain that they raised livestock. I can't remember if I saw many cows, but I do remember seeing a ton of goats and pigs, so who knows what kind of operation they were running. Never saw the people, nor did I meet them. This is relevant and important at the time. I was working at security at this nearby company, doing the night shift gig. Sometimes I wouldn't be there till 11 p.m. Other nights it was 2 a.m. My schedule varied on and off. There were a couple of nights that I remember seeing this tall, super skinny dog walking on 2 legs coming out of this old fence from that farm with a dead pig or goat in its arms. It creeped me right out. The first time I only ever saw it from the back when my headlights hit it. As soon as they did, it took off even faster into the woods nearby, but I saw the dead pig it was carrying. First time I said a few choice words, and I didn't know what kind of animal it was. It sure was freaky looking. I don't know what kind of animals lived out here. I don't think I ever really once thought about werewolves or Bigfoot or any of that. I didn't believe in that stuff. I'm also not a country boy, so the wild is an unknown area for me. I just stick to what I know. And I tell you, I have never seen such a slender dog-like animal walking on 2 legs like that. It was also very tall. The first thing I noticed was the cropped ears. For the first second, it honestly looked like how a dog does when it stands up and puts its 2 front paws on you. Same tapered waist and hocks like a dog. But this thing was walking and then running on 2 legs, like it was comfortable doing so. It strongly resembled a German Shepherd from behind, but it was a dark brown color, just from what I saw. The second time I saw it was shortly after the first, and it was facing me this time, going towards the area that I saw it last time. This time it was also empty-handed. That's when I saw it from the front, and when I say freaky looking, I mean freaky looking. It was very lanky, skinny, but didn't look starving. Also not very muscular at all either, but fairly lean. It had extremely long arms and legs, and a very unnaturally large head. It was again walking on 2 legs. I never once thought werewolf because it didn't resemble a werewolf or anything that I'd ever seen. Just a freak of nature. My head spun around again when my headlights hit it. I immediately recognized it as the creature that I had seen previously. It had a very angry, pissed off look on its face. Its face was stuck in a snarl position, revealing its massive canine fangs that were protruding down like a saber-toothed cat. Didn't get to look at the face much, because my lights were only on it for a few seconds as I passed by, and it paid no attention to me or my vehicle. It was clearly on a mission to get to wherever it was going. It was walking just like a man though. Super freaky like I said. Gave me the creeps. I didn't see it again after that for a while. Not until the following summer, where I was still working the same job and the same varied schedule. I saw it a few more times that same year, all throughout the summer and fall. I never saw it facing me like I did that one time, but it was without a doubt the same animal. There's no mistaking it. Nothing looks like that animal did, nor is tall or walks on 2 legs like that. Each time I saw it, the thing either had a dead pig in its arms or a dead goat. One time, it had a goat's body with no head, and there was dried blood all over. I wouldn't see it every night, but just here and there. It really freaked me out enough that eventually I would start to think about it and hope not to see it again. I worked security at that job for a total of 2 years, and then got a different job with a totally different company on the opposite side of town, resulting in me never driving around that road again. I never told my girlfriend at the time or her family about what I saw during my time there as a security guy. I spent some time years back in my small travel trailer, being out on the road, enjoying seclusion away from people and things. Since I primarily work from home and only really need the internet a couple of days a week, I spent most of my time in the middle of nowhere, enjoying the solace of the wilderness around me. At night, I would start fires, have a beer or two, and crash out in my small bed in my trailer. Because of the experiences I had, on 2 separate occasions, I've certainly slowed down on my camp rendezvousing for the time being, and just learned to settle with a piece of property to call my own. Thankfully, I have not dealt with anything as I did in my trailer here, which is nice. On 2 separate occasions, I was parked at different national parks, one in Oklahoma, the other in Kansas. Both times I heard the same really low rumbling noise. It was like a growling outside of my trailer late at night. My trailer is very small, so there ain't much to protect me if, say, a bear wanted to come and charge me and eat my face off. I didn't have any real forms of protection on me either, other than a large hunting knife. Not near enough to ward away any serious predator or threat. Stupid me, I know. These low rumblings would grow in volume and then decrease in volume over and over. The intervals were random, and they'd be going on all throughout the night, all around my trailer. It sounded like a big wolf, but it was also so loud and powerful that you could feel the bass vibrations through your body. Whatever was making those growling sounds had to possess a massive set of lungs on them and be far larger than any bear. It made me get out of there real fast. The second time it happened, I didn't waste any time. I heard that same growling noise in the middle of the night, and man, I got up out of my sleeping bag and just ripped it out right out of there. I don't know what kind of animal it came from, and frankly, I didn't care long enough to stick around. What I do know is that of all the animals it could have been, a bear and a mountain lion do not exhibit those behaviors like that. The first night, this animal stuck around most of the night and circled my trailer. I'm certain wolves don't even behave this way. Besides, it was so large, the only thing I could think of that would have given it justice would have been a bear. Again, bears don't behave like this either. The energy I felt was extremely hostile, as if I had encroached on this thing's home. If you're ever out touring the wild or national parks of states, be careful where you park your camper for the night. There are things that you don't want to encounter in the dark. This story involves a bit of tragedy, so I'll just come out and say it. First, I was never close at all with my grandfather. He was a very wicked man to me and my family growing up. Extremely cold, so we never had a close relationship. He was extremely verbally and physically abusive to my mother growing up, so again, no real relationship ties or anything there. Just this last month, we were alerted by another family member that a wild dog broke into his house and he apparently died of a heart attack. When police showed up at the house, there was definitive signs and evidence to support the break-in of a large unknown animal. Everything pointed to a canine. My grandfather was found on the living room floor, dead. He had died with a horrified expression on his face, and it was later revealed that he passed away from cardiac arrest. A family member found him and called the police, and they investigated. My family and I didn't find any of this out till recently, when the family member who discovered him called us to tell us personally. He lives in an entirely different state, so again, we have no real ties with him, nor have we seen him in some time. I do know that he lives alone in a small house with no neighbors. I don't know where he lives geographically speaking, but I know it's not in town. Anyway, this family member told us that whatever broke in broke down the side to his house, the back door, I guess, into the kitchen. It had been ripped off or broken off entirely off its hinges, and large muddied canine-like tracks and marks were all over the kitchen and floor. Whatever dog or animal this was never touched any portion of the house besides the kitchen and dining room areas. It also never touched my grandfather or touched him when he was deceased. While my family, who was close with him, is dealing with the mourning, the thoughts of a dogman being the only one responsible is the thing that's really sending chills down my spine and haunting my thoughts. I'm obsessed with cryptids and channels like yours, so as soon as this happened, I wanted to get your opinion on what you think. The family member who told us called my mother and told her, and then she relayed the info to me. None of my family knows or really believes in any of that stuff, but when I was told all of this, it rang a huge bell, a huge red flag. It screams Dogman. I believe a dogman killed him, broke into his house, and scared him so bad he had a heart attack. I've listened to plenty of Vic Hundiff's dogman encounters, and yours, so I know a dogman encounter when I hear one. I'm still trying to register the craziness of this. I never thought it would happen to my family out of everybody. I'm almost certain this was dogman related. I mean, really, what large canine-like animal breaks into a house with as much force as this did and not attack my grandfather? What kind of canine rips the back door off a house completely off its hinges? There's no bear, no wolf, no animal that can possess that kind of human-like intelligence or strength. Maybe as time goes on, I can get some more answers for you, but for now, I can at least relay this info to you. Wish me luck as I go and dig for what else more I can find. I'll let you know when I do. I truly believe that what I saw that day was indeed something real. This happened to me back when I was just a teenager. I was 14 and visiting extended family in Missouri. They kind of live out in the sticks, so it took a while to get all of us out there. All the meanwhile, my father getting lost a few times just trying to find it. After we had, our plan was to stay there for about a week and then move on to go see my grandfather and grandmother who live in upstate New York. While we were here, I had some cousins that I hadn't seen since I was very little, so reconnecting with long-forgotten family was very great. I do remember that one evening, we were out there at nighttime. We had a big bonfire out in the backyard. My cousins that I hadn't seen in forever were telling me spooky stories, trying to scare me, but I wasn't buying it. Then we got onto the topic of exploring, and they got onto the topic of Bigfoot. I wasn't a believer in Bigfoot, so again, didn't scare me at all. Then they start talking about zombies, and that's when they start mentioning that there's an old gravesite just beyond the trees somewhere down the way. It's a very old gravesite that has been there long before this house was ever built. Instead of being demolished, it was just kind of left there, and the forest grew around it. They kind of pulled the whole pet cemetery vibe, you know, where you can bring a dead cat and bury it there, and it's supposed to come back with some evil magic or something like that. But again, I wasn't buying it. However, the thought of exploring an uncharted spooky graveyard did pique my interest, and I asked them if we can go see it. They kept making comments like, yeah, but you're going to be scared and the Bigfoot will get you. I couldn't count the times that I rolled my eyes. It just became a passing conversation, and we ended up moving on to different things, and the days went by before the whole gravesite thing would ever be brought up again. I believe it was a few nights later when a couple of my cousins were getting ready to go on a night hike, and they asked me if I wanted to join in and to go show me the gravesite. At this time, I had completely forgotten all about it. I was excited, so of course I said yes. My father and my mother were very lenient people, not to mention forgiving, and I was 14, so I don't think they really could care. They wanted to make sure I had the proper flashlights and equipment and what have you. Luckily for me, my extended family was also partial pack rats, so we had everything from headlamps to big mag flashlights that the cops used to use. Don't ask me how they acquired all this stuff. I think they hunted garage sales like madmen and bought as much as they could. They were what I'd like to call preppers, so they weren't short on anything survival related. It was me and 3 of my other cousins, and we decided midnight would be the perfect time to go out. I can remember that night pretty vividly. It was so dark with all the cloud coverage, and there wasn't much light. It's probably a good thing that we had high-quality flashlights. We had to cross a couple large pastures and through about half a mile of woods. During the trip, I remember complaining, saying that this is further than you guys made it seem, while giving me the whole "it's just a bit further" rhetoric. I'm sure you've all heard that one before, when somebody tells you something is just right there. They were right though. When we got to it, it was incredibly hard to notice at first, because things have been so overgrown. This gravesite was so old that we couldn't really find any information on it at first. There was a big stone slab in front that had been taken over by the years of growth in the forest, but the writing was so worn away. It was illegible. The gravesite was smaller than I expected it to be. Maybe 30 graves in total, with some not having much of a tombstone left at all. Most names we saw had been so weathered away that we had a hard time making out dates and names, but a couple of the dates we saw were in the 1800s. The whole gravesite felt forgotten about, as if we had stumbled onto an old relic of time. The forest was so thick on all the surrounding sides of the gravesite. Massive pine trees and thick brush pretty much kept all visibility nil. The trees were so tall around here that I'm sure even during the day, there probably wasn't a whole lot of room for daylight. We spent a little bit of time going through the site from grave to grave, seeing what we could find for information and to get a real feel for how old this place really is. There wasn't really much of a fence or bordering, at least anything that was left. This was pretty primitively built, so whenever this gravesite was erected, it probably didn't have a whole lot of money put into it. This would lead me to believe that this gravesite was probably owned by somebody extremely poor. In fact, the most expensive things that were on the gravesite were probably the tombstones, and even these were falling apart and eroded away from heavy weathering. There was a single stone, though, that had been set apart from the other stones, which was one of the last graves we were going to go check out. It was larger than the rest, and kind of in a weird circular shape I had never seen. We figured it might have been somebody important. This grave was also away from the rest of the graves by probably about 20 to 30 feet in its own little area. Potentially an owner of the land, a mayor, somebody of power. This gravestone had much less erosion than the other ones, and in fact, the writing on it was even much more legible as well. The thing that was odd to me and all of us was the gravestone didn't have a name, but I'll never forget what it said. Master of Coven, Priest of Black. We kind of chuckled to ourselves, saying, "What? What does that mean?" The date was from 1806 to 1890. We decided to spend a little more time looking around before calling it a night, but there really wasn't much left to look at. As we're gathering ourselves, getting ready to leave, we began to hear what sounded like heavy wings flapping. Then, the most horrendous feeling hit us like a fist to the gut. Everything around us went from calm to downright terrifying. I never have gone from calm to complete and utter fear in such a short amount of time in my life. We're hearing these wings flap, and it sounded extremely close by, up in the trees. We all looked at each other, confused, because we're wondering what kind of bird that's this large is flying around at this time of night. We heard the loud crash of something very large standing on a thick branch around us. We shined our lights around to see what was there, and not even 50 feet away from us, on a branch, was this gargoyle-looking creature glaring at us. When we flashed our lights, it spread its wings and gave us this vicious scream like it was there to kill us. It's important for me to really describe to you just how ugly this thing was. This thing was massive and had to have been easily the size of a lion, if not bigger. I mean, it was huge, and sitting up on this top thick branch, probably 16 or more inches in diameter if I had to guess. I mean, any thinner of a branch, and there's no way that a branch would have held the weight of whatever this was. It looked just like a gargoyle, but much more evil. It was very smoky charcoal gray in skin color, and we all can recall the faint smell of a sulfur-like smell. It had piercing red eyes and millions of jagged, pointed teeth. It must have been watching us. I don't know where it came from or how it got there, but it was one of the most awful experiences I've had. It spreading its wings at us like it did and screaming at us gave me nightmares for years afterward. It was total evil. We all screamed louder than we ever have and took off running back to the house faster than any of us have ever ran before. Making it back to the house in record time, my cousins were checking behind us constantly to see if we had been followed by that thing. After making it into the house, we weren't quiet about at all what happened. We're screaming and sobbing, waking up just about every other adult in the process. My parents and family freaked the heck out. Here are a bunch of teenagers, 14 and 19, crying like babies and shaking over what we all just saw. There were 4 of us to attest to all seeing the same thing. Surprisingly, our parents and family actually kind of believed us, and I will say, thank the Lord for all 4 of us seeing it versus just one. I do believe it added so much more validity and credibility to our story. Our parents just hugged us and comforted us. We eventually calmed down, but we all slept in the living room that night, after being awake for hours and hours. I mean, you don't easily go to sleep after something horrendous like that. The next morning came and went, and we never really talked about it again. It was never brought back up on that trip, and things sort of returned to normal for the remainder of short time we were there. There was no more mentioning hikes out in the woods or anything like that. We just didn't talk about it. My one cousin, though, was really quiet after it, and he didn't speak much or show much emotion the following days. I think we all processed trauma and fear differently. I respected it. It wasn't until later on in the years to come that we would talk about the event again in passing and learn more details here and there. Later on, I learned that a coven is actually kind of a secret group of witches that conduct witchcraft. They're generally ruled by a high priestess and a high priest, or sometimes one or the other. Sometimes same-sex couples as well. Whoever this person remained nameless, but they were clearly the leader of a witch's coven. I think we stumbled upon a coven gravesite that was potentially family ran. I'm not too sure, since I tried to research a sentence and haven't been able to find anything on it. Whatever demonic being we saw that night is what I believe to be the guardian of that gravesite. You think with that kind of graveyard, it would possess some sort of off-putting demonic energy or bad feelings, but it didn't. I don't recall feeling anything out of place until that one moment of extreme fear. Listen, I know my story sounds crazy and probably made up, or like some sort of rookie horror fiction story, but it happened to me, and I don't really tell a lot of people because most will write me off. I have to live with the experience, and I figured telling people like you who could share my story would be the best way to overcome it and to live with it. Edit. In the future. Hi. I emailed you a few months back about the gargoyle encounter that I believe I had encountered in my teens. I had expressed to you at the time that my firm belief was that this creature was the guardian of this family coven, or some sort of small operated coven. Well, since I emailed you that story, I reached out to my extended family that still lives over on that property, and I was able to get a little more information on it. Apparently, they know a lot more about it than I did. What happened is long ago, one of the first few settling families that had started developing the land there and living there had formed a secret coven together, in which they would practice black magic. It was actually a band of about 4 or 5 families, with the family that owned my relative's property being the main ones operating the coven. It was run by a lone man, whom they called the Black Priest, and he operated all things within this coven. The graves in that area are all from those families that participated in this coven of witchcraft. Not all family members served in the coven, but it sounds like most did. We couldn't find much about the nitty-gritty details other than that there was heavy witchcraft going on. But I couldn't find anything conclusive, like on sacrificial rituals or things like that. I was never able to find out the head priest's name either, the one whom ran the coven. It sounds like he and the coven kept on the down low pretty well and operated entirely underground. Not literally underground, just secretive. He is actually still buried there today, along with much of his family and the other families that served in that coven. Then, I guess as the years went by after he passed, much of the coven split up and fell apart, with the remaining practicers operating in smaller covens. But he was actually one of the last ones to die and wanted to be placed at that gravesite. After he had passed, his family passed the land on to other owners who decided to leave the gravesite as is, and the land just grew around it for a long time. It was kind of just left abandoned. It borders state game land now, but the gravesite itself falls into that relative's property, so it's just been left there, left to rot and be forgotten to time. After the ownership had been passed on, it had finally gotten passed on a couple of more times where my relative's house was then built and used for farming or other stuff, but that entire forest and forest area was left completely intact and untouched. I believe my relatives bought it right before the Great Depression in the 20s, and it's been there since. They've been updating the house ever since they've had it, since it's a house that's been in our generation for a long time. The grave site is not incredibly far back there, maybe half a mile, and with how much overgrowth there was, you wouldn't just be able to see it and go right to it. It could have been very easily missed if you didn't know it was there. Sorry, I'm not trying to make this email long, I just wanted you to have more information on my story. I wouldn't be shocked if he had placed some sort of hex or voodoo spell over that place to have some sort of demonic guardian watch over their eternal resting spot. With the witchcraft, who knows? Anyway, the whole thing still gives me the chills thinking about it. These following sightings occurred in Madison County, Illinois. It was Christmas Eve, around December 24th, 1980, 7 p.m. It was very, very cold. I just turned onto Illinois Railroad 44, heading north, and was picking up speed when I saw something in the middle of the road. There were no other cars in the area, so I turned my bright lights on and started hitting my brakes. As I got closer, I saw a Bigfoot just standing in the middle of the road, looking at me, as if it was blinded by my headlights. I came to almost a complete and utter stop as I looked at it and moved the car into the opposite lane to avoid hitting it. I came within inches of it and looking at it the entire time. It was standing up, but seemed to be kind of bent over at the waist. It was holding its right arm up against its chest, like if you would have your arm in a sling. I estimate it well over 7 feet tall. At the time, I had a brother who was 6'8", and I know it was much taller than he was. I keep saying it because I'm not sure of its sex. I was in amazement and not sure what to do. I decided to go to the next road and turn around, but it was gone when I returned, around 2 minutes later. The best is I can remember the temperature outside. It was freezing outside, well below zero. This is a very rural area, and there is no reason anybody would be standing in the middle of the road on Christmas Eve in this kind of weather, dressed up like a Bigfoot. Especially, who's that tall to begin with? I am a hunter and have spent many hours in the woods, but I have never seen anything like that before or after. I've been wanting to talk about this for years, to give this report about what happened to me. I went and reported it when it happened to the local police, but they didn't make an official report, just because of the circumstances. This happened back in 1978. I was a teletype operator in the US Air Force. I was a crypto guy. We monitored Russian and Chinese teletype. In 1978, I had just come out of tech school and went back home to southern Illinois, where I was raised. The reason I found this was through some other guy's website who had something to do with the Southern University of Edwardville. I grew up in East St. Louis, which is 4 miles south of Monk's Mound. I went home on leave in 1978, the fall of 78. I have a top secret clearance. In fact, I went one above top secret my last year of the service overseas, so I was very leery of saying anything. I was just on my way up to visit a friend one morning, on home on leave. I had my dad's car, and he's at work. I'm driving up the campus, up on University Drive, and there's this little old church, St. Paul's United Church of Christ, right there on the frontage road, right before you head up into the bluffs, into the university proper. I had driven down there before, and for some reason, just went to see what was down there. I had driven down there, and for some reason, just to see what was down there. I had never driven down there before. It was kind of a foggy morning, kind of misty and rainy. There's nothing behind this old church other than a bunch of hay fields. There was a bunch of hay rings where the guy had just drug through and done the hay thing. I'm driving down the road. I was going to turn around in the grass behind the church, and I could see this bear way down on the dirt road, and it's bent over, splashing water in a puddle in the middle of the road. As I pull closer to this thing, it's not a bear, and it is huge. I bring my car within about 10 yards of it, and then veer off into the field, and get out with my door between me and the thing. And it stands up, and it's like 8 or 9 feet tall. It looked like a black humanoid. I grew up in southern Illinois. I am a hunter, and my father was a hunter. I had a goose gun in my trunk. I get the gun out. Something in my head clicked, and I'm thinking. Of course, there were all these stories about things being up in Illinois, but I'd never really heard of anything about my area. But something in my head clicked. I remember hearing about Bigfoot in California, and I thought, this is one of those Bigfoots. I'm going to wound this thing, and Barnum and Bailey, here I come. I shot off with this goose gun to the left of this thing, and it did not move. And then I shot off to the right. It didn't move again. Something inside me just said, you can't hurt this thing, and if you try to hurt it, it is only going to hurt you. And with that, it kind of shrugged, what it looked like its shoulders at me, and it binged off into the woods that are just north of that road. And each one of its leaps, binges, jumps, whatever it was about 20 feet at a time, and it was gone. Well, I completely freaked out. I went into the local gas station and washed my face off, and I drove right into Edwardsville, into the Madison County Sheriff's Office, and there was an old-time deputy, and he looked at me after I told him the whole thing, and he said, you know, I would think you were crazy or on drugs if it weren't for the fact that I had ever heard the same story in the last couple of weeks, and 3 of them were from good friends of mine who were out hunting and saw the same thing you did. If I was you, knowing the kind of job you got and you're getting ready to do, I wouldn't tell anybody about this for a long time, and you would be a lot better off. And that was probably the most sound advice I've ever got, because if I had told somebody about this, they would have jerked my clearance and messed me around in the Air Force. The first incident occurred on Monday night, June 4th, 1973. The other 2 happened between the 4th of June and the 8th of June on 1973. In 3 separate incidents, 3 residents reported seeing and being chased by a musty-odored, red-eyed, human-sized creature or monster. The creature was described as 5 feet 8 inches tall, broad-shouldered, with red eyes that cannot stand light. It makes no sound, even when it walks. One male described it to police at an incident which it ripped his shirt and scratched his chest. Reports describe the creature as lurking in the woods. My mother and I were traveling between New Douglas and Livingston on New Douglas Road, heading west to Livingston. It was dark, and in the headlights, we both saw it run from the left side of the road to the right side of the road, in front of the car. The road had steep banks on both sides, and it ran down and across the road and out of sight on the other side of the road very quickly. It went from being on all 4s to 2 legs as it was crossing. It was big, brown, hairy, and very fast. My mother and I both looked at each other and just said, "Did you see that?" at the same time. We were scared to turn around, but did go back with 2 other people within about 30 minutes of the sighting, but we didn't see a thing. After we saw this, my mom told me that when she was a kid living in New Douglas, that there were stories of a crazy guy that lived in the woods in the same area. I can tell you 100% that this wasn't a person or any other animal that I have ever seen. I had just gotten my son down to sleep. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. He sleeps in the back bedroom. I happened to walk by the window in the hallway because I had to go to the bathroom. For some reason, I heard a cough. It sounded like somebody clearing their throat. I had just put the pool down. We have one of those quick set ring pools that you blow up for my son. I just took it down and was drying it off. I thought somebody was out there looking at it or messing with it. So I opened the blinds and looked. I didn't see anything right off the bat. But then I saw something between the woods and my shed. It was just standing there, and it was big. The head looked huge, so I ran upstairs and got my night vision. When I kicked that night vision on, I could see every detail. It was staring up in the trees. He was at least 8.5 feet tall, about 40 yards from the window. He looked to be gray in color. It looked like a really big human. If people want to know what the face looks like, if you put this guy in a Viking movie with a horned helmet on, people would say he was a Viking. That's how human looking he was. He had really sunken eyes, but he was just looking up in the trees. And then I heard somebody's radio down at the parking lot of the bike trail. It was pretty amazing. I was watching him and thinking, he's hanging out there because he's waiting for people to leave. Nobody could see him there. And the only reason I did is because I was walking by the window and saw something in my yard that is not normally there. I even went to take my wife and have her seen too, but he was gone.